You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast, and this week we are holding ourselves accountable, or as close to accountable as we get. We are taking a look back at our Murderers of Karlov Manor hype review. And if you watched, you may know that both of us picked Anzra, the Quake Mole, as way too high.
Yes.
And, dude, everything we said, the card's not good. It's a meme tribe that has no members. It's not like cats or dogs. It was just not good. And it was half of a couple of good cards, but not the halves you want.
Yep.
And there was no way it was going to maintain. I think it was like a $20 price point at that time. And, you know, obviously it's the new shiny toy, but it should have fallen off much quicker than it did. And I just want to say we were both right. It's great. It feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I think, still the fourth most popular commander. It's in play, and seeing play in about 2,000 decks. That ties it effectively with Massacre Girl for the fourth most popular commander in this deck. For reference, the third most popular commander is Judith at 4,000 decks, and the number one most popular commander is Voja, 6,500 decks. So there's a huge gap. There's three times as more Voja decks as there are Ansrog decks, and so that feels pretty right at the end of the day. As a card in the 99, though, this is in almost 4,000 decks, and it's just barely inside the top 40 cards of the main set, behind such great cards as Scene of the Crime and Undergrowth Recon. So I think people truly are starting to see through the haze of this card. And I'm not going to bring those cards up on the podcast because they're terrible. You can look them up on your own. But they are just such all-stars.
Like, they deserve love too.
So you can see this card is tumbling in terms of popularity in the 99, and it's, you know, way far behind in regards to like the number one and even the number two commander. I thought Pride of the Hulklade, when we were doing our hype review, would be a lot more popular. I might have mentioned it. I took some notes on it. It's in half as many decks as Ansrog and as a commander, and that's even really surprising for me. So seeing Ansrog remain this popular for as long as it has is a little perplexing, but it is good to see that it is kind of falling out of favor over time. And for me, like, I think this is where we started to branch out, which is great. My underhyped card was Forensic Gadgeteer. And like I mentioned in the episode, I thought this was going to be a combo piece. It was going to go in the same decks that you would see Training Grounds in, maybe even Hearthstone, and some Zerda decks, although Zerda cannot be the commander. It can be the companion or be in part of the list overall. And for those that don't know, Forensic Gadgeteer is 2 and a blue for a 2/3. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate, which is awesome, so you're just making a clue to draw later. Activated abilities of artifacts you control cost a colorless less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana cost of that ability to less than 1. So great, your clues now just cycle for 1. It's fantastic. This is still, and I want to harp on that word, still the 15th most popular card in the set. It's now behind 8 of the 10 Surveil lands, Demand Answers, Archdruid's Charm, War Leader's Call, Delny, and Crime Novelist. These are some actually extraordinary cards in this set, and I think it's a great sign overall, as unless there's a sleeper somewhere deeper in the set, cracking the top 15 is going to be a chore, and Gadgeteer is already there. Because like I said, you start at 9th with the 8 Surveil lands, or 8 out of the 10, right? And the other 2 aren't too far behind, so this like top 15, top 20 is very crowded, and Gadgeteer is still here.
So really top 7.
Effectively,
if we're being honest. Yeah, and any set that did not have arguably the second best duels ever printed.
Yeah.
It's a good spot.
Yep. Yeah, it's fantastic. For you, your underhype was
Insidious Roots. And the
yeah,
reason
that
I
uncommon.
liked this card, and the reason I still like this card, is because it's Cryptolith Right with friends, basically. Now, price-wise, we're sitting at about the same point that we were. It's a showcase card. This was something that I thought was going to be a little bit harder to find, and to find a home in, and that would take a little bit longer. Now, if you take a look at EDH Rec, it is in 7,500 decks as part of the 99. Obviously cannot be a commander. I still believe in this effect. I still think this is good. I'm not sure that, calling unlimited quantity like I did was necessarily the right move.
Yeah.
Although I think that this card long term, and this may be something that if we see make a splash, it's not going to be a content creator. This is probably like European Eternal Weekend gets a deck tech of some random graveyard shenanigan Nick Fit list, and this is in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to push this card. So maybe Eternal Weekend we see a little bit of a bump, maybe not, but that's basically what I'd try to look to. But right now, I still not underhyped, but I said then it would be a year or more. So
yeah, it's actually in the top 20. I think it's the 20th spot from cards within the set from MKM. Yeah. It is not the only uncommon or common at the top. It's got some decent company in Demand Answers, which is the red impulse draw spell that we were talking about. Crime Novelist, Escape Tunnel, and then Insidious Roots. Those are the 4 non-rares, non-mythics in the top 20 from this set. So people are using this card in Commander. It's seeing play. I don't know if it's trended up in terms of popularity because I didn't track it when we were talking about it. But I think it's just a great card overall. It does a lot of interesting things like we talked about. The bug or insect or whatever like typal deck keeps getting more options. Obviously, this pairs well with Grist in any format where you can play the two together. So like you said, some weird Nick Fit shell. We've been talking about, we have a very, if you've ever read MTG The Source and you ever read a Nick Fit report, that player is one of my locals. And
that's amazing.
We are
one of the greatest tournament reports ever.
So we have been discussing the opportunity to play Nick Fit in Legacy once the new Cultivate comes out in MH3, the free Cultivate.
Yep.
Because it's just another way to sack your Veteran Explorer. So does Insidious Roots play in that deck? Yeah, maybe it absolutely could. So it's not necessarily Magical Christmas Land or some fever dream that we could see Nick Fit come up like you're talking about. But it is definitely an option in front of us as players in a format to have to discuss that deck again, because now there's a way to sacrifice your Veteran Explorer for free and get like 4 lands out of it. 3 of them enter the battlefield. 1 of them's in your hand. It's insane the value you get off of that and the amount of accelerant you just pour into the first turn of the game from those 2 spells alone.
The most busted play I've ever seen was a turn 1 Nick Fit. Anyways.
Yeah. I like Insidious Roots overall. I talked about this before. I think there's a lot to do with the triggered ability. Whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a plant, and then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. That just works really well with some of the options we have in the format right now, like especially in Avengers, Zendikar. I want to say the format, even Commander. There are a lot of things that just make 0/1 plants, like Colony Garden makes plants. So you just have the option to just happen to have a bunch of 0/1 plant tokens because you played cards from the original Zendikar block, and you just end up pumping the squad for free. Like when Avenger goes down and you're left with a bunch of 1/2 plants, well, Insidious Roots can follow up and continue to push those tokens over the finish line and end the game for you. If that doesn't happen, you have the ability to, like we talked about, to delve, to Bajuka Bog, to dredge, to whatever, right? It doesn't say they have to be exiled. You just have to leave the graveyard, go somewhere
Leave the graveyard.
else. Yeah. So
even reanimated.
Yep, exactly. So there's a lot of opportunity for some weird and interesting things with Insidious Roots. So I wouldn't expect it to start climbing up in popularity from where it is right now. 7,500 decks, not a lot to, nothing to sneeze at. That is a fairly popular card. And I still think it's as good now as it was when we talked about it.
Yeah.
And then for me, my just right was Archdruid's card, and I basically evaluated this card from a commander standpoint. And it looks like my prediction is kind of holding true. It's still the second most popular card in the set, but it's within striking distance of being the number one card in the set. So again, we're in the right spot. Archdruid's Charm is in almost 18,000 decks. It is behind Demand Answers. That is the number one card in the set, and it is in 19,000 decks. That is within striking distance. I don't see this tumbling too far down the list, but I did undervalue the Surveil lands, so I can see some of those moving up past Archdruid's Charm, and I honestly think that's fine. Good lands should be more popular than spells in Commander, and we have the Sultai Surveil lands right behind Archdruid's Charm in 16,000 decks each. So even if we see Archdruid's Charm tumble down behind lands, I think that's still a fine spot. Overall, I think this card is going to maintain a foothold in the format, and it's going to become a mainstay of green-heavy decks.
Yeah, I loved Archdruid's Charm. I still think I undervalued it because, like I said, when you were talking about it, I was like, at first I was like, this card's not that great. And then the more I read it, I realized, no, this is actually insane. It is better than Archmage's Charm. It will see tons of play in EDH, and it will see a ton of play in Modern as well, I'm sure. And I think this is one of those rare cases where a card is well designed and the community somehow recognizes the value almost immediately.
Yep.
And at an appropriate level. They don't think it's too good. They don't think it's too bad. They are literally just Goldilocksing it as just right. And it's a card that, I think at this point, if I'm vending a Magic event, I would probably rank that in top 5 green cards I'm going to bring. Card is great. I love it.
You've got to bring your Sylvan Scryings and like your Crop Rots. Harrows you don't have to have anymore, but like all that stuff, like Hour of Promise that gets non-basics, like you got to do that, and that's what Archdruid's Charm does. So it's got to be somewhere floating around. Like, and the price, and the price tag kind of demands it. It's like a $10 card, so it's a worthwhile case spot.
I, on the other hand, had a card that I said at the time was appropriately hyped and priced at $15, with the caveat that it was going to lose first but long-term stabilize. And that was Leyline of the Guild Pack, despite its odd 4 green pips.
Yep.
Whatever. It's a multicolor, everything is Painless City of Brass. What was the Planescape or Plane Chase plane that did that everybody loved? Well, now you get it as a Leyline for just you. I think this card is great. Painless City of Brass, and everything is all colors. Plus, and I said this when I acknowledged the most important part is that everything retains its land types. So Valakut was the example you came up with. It was just spot on. Yes, this is great in those lists. This is Dryad of the Elysian Grove that's harder to kill. Granted, it does require that you play 5 colors, which I guess is kind of restrictive. Factor, but other than that, it's a card that looks really good and could, again, see play in Pioneer eventually if we start to see Mono Green Devotion need an effect like this for some reason. But it's currently sitting in around 7,000 decks, so just outside of top 20, I believe that makes it. And sitting at about $12 low on TCG. I thought it was just right. I think that $10 to $15 range is exactly where a card with this effect and this cost belongs, especially from a set with collection boosters.
Okay. This one was difficult for me to evaluate from a Commander perspective because this was immediately like pulled into Modern and is now like doing the exact same things in Legacy and Vintage that it's doing in Modern to varying degrees of success. So my view of the card is still a bit tainted in that regard. I see this more of as a constructed card than I do a Commander card. But had I had this at the time when I was playing Child of Alara, like 5-color deck, this would have been slotted in alongside Chromatic Lantern and the World Tree and Prismatic Omen to make sure my non-basic land mana base was able to support the color needs of the deck on the whole. And from that perspective, I think it's a very strong card.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think its utility in the Commander format is going to be based solely around the decks that are going to want it. And it's not to say that there aren't decks that don't want it. There are a lot of decks that can take advantage of it for sure. It doesn't look like there are a lot of people that might be willing to try it just yet.
Yeah.
And I think that could be what's holding it back. I thought this would just get slammed into Joda, for instance. But that's not even the most popular commander that plays it. It's Sisse, Weatherlight Captain. And I did not expect that. That is a very aggressive commander, a very aggressive and competitive deck. I didn't think playing Leyline of the Void in that deck made sense, nor would it in Ramos or Essica or Ur-Dragon. But there it is. Those are some of the most popular commanders for this card. So for me, it's still weird to evaluate this and hard to come up with, is this right or is it wrong? But it does have some very neat comparison points that kind of lead me to believe that my valuation of this card is wrong and it should be more popular than it is in the long run. And it could just be, if we take a look at stocks, I'll bring this up, the almost vertical price increase back in February because of the not the Pro Tour, the RC Denver, where the Leyline was legal for that weekend and 5C Rhinos just took over that event. Right. And it might have just scared people off from buying this and trying it in Commander. So this could be a wait and see kind of card. And that we might see more adoption in time because of that. But for me, this is, I understand why this is a good card in Commander. I just have to step away from that constructed worldview that I have. My heuristic for this card is constructed. I think that's wrong. And once I can break out of that, I'll see why this is better in Commander than I think it is. Otherwise, if you're hemming and hawing about it, I think now is the perfect time to get it. We're not really going to be opening much more murders. We have just kind of hit the low. We are slowly starting to recover in terms of market price, so it's not really going to get that much cheaper unless somebody just pops infinite cases and shoves. So overall, I think it is a just right card for Commander, like you pointed out, so it was a good call. And then the Surveil lands.
Yes.
So you asked, we were talking about this in the pre-show. I didn't look to see what I had to say for reasons we will discuss. You and I have discussed and we will discuss soon. What were your thoughts on the Surveil lands?
So I thought they were going to drop drastically because they were like the blue-black one was like $8.
Yep.
It's gone up. I also said I think like $10 is where these should be. I think that was wrong. I think they should be more. These cards are insane. I can't wait to see what happens at Eternal Weekend because I guarantee you there will be some kind of reanimator shenanigans that gets on camera at some point, running their Surveil lands, and all of a sudden there's a run on them. It's going to happen, and these lands are good. That's really all I got. They're insane.
Yeah, the reason I didn't look back to see what I had to say was because no matter what I said, that valuation was going to be wrong. This is what I told you before we recorded. And I had no idea how important they were going to be for at least Standard and Legacy, 2 formats I am actively playing. And they always looked good in Commander, so that was never a question. And as a one-of in Commander, it makes sense. You play the Temples because you can. Scrying versus Surveilling is kind of splitting hairs, which is better. I feel like Opt and Consider are 2 completely different cards, and they have 2 completely different uses, and one is not strictly better than the other. And from a constructed standpoint, when you're looking at Commander, you should be running both because you only have 1 copy of everything. That said, I really didn't expect these to be as impactful as they are, but also as rock steady as they have been in terms of price. I thought they would follow the Modern Horizons 1 Horizon lands,
Yeah.
which is they were released. People went nuts. I said they're going to be $4 cards. Just watch it. And then what happened? I scooped my playset, my 4X, at $4 each because Modern Horizons was just opened into the ground. And so was Murders, but it just didn't drop. So that price retraction to basically a floor that you and I kind of thought would be the case or would be the numbers never really happened. Nope. That the numbers were what they were, and they're only really going up on almost all of them. Lush Portico, the green-white one, might be lagging behind at like $4, $4 to $6. I really don't know, but it's only a matter of time. Having played these in Legacy, there's no reason why you should not be playing at least one in any deck unless you are on basically 4 or 5 color beans. That is the only reason why you wouldn't play these. You already have to dedicate slots to your Grixis Triome. You cannot afford a 2-color land to come into play tapped. You need Xander's Lounge and Savannah to give you all 5 colors, and that's it. If you wanted to change it up, you could try and go with Lush Portico, the green-white one, and like some weird convoluted mashup of like duels for your beans deck, light or dark, whichever version you're playing, and maybe get there. Outside of that, it's Undercity Sewers, X1, and Dimir Scam and Rescaminator. People are debating whether Thundering Falls, the blue-red one, goes in Grixis Delver and or is it Sneak. Like, these lands are being considered. They're not auto includes. The 5th Underground Sea in Rescaminator and the Scam deck, super important. It's like having the 5th Volcanic in the Expressive Iteration version of Delver, where you would just play the 1 Steam Vents because you needed it. This is a little extra value, and those decks can afford an ETB tap land on 1 because you're going to cast a free spell in Grief.
Yep.
So in Legacy, it's really important. It basically gives you a free consider on turn 1 while you're casting a 0 mana discard spell. Like that's how you have to look at it, is that it's a 0 mana consider with a 0 mana play to back it up in Legacy. In Standard, it allows the wedge. The wedge colors to work. So I've been messing around with the Temur Beans deck, and the only way to get Temur lands to work is to be playing the ally-colored lands that are offered in either Pain lands, which are not good, because the red deck is very good. There are the fast land reprints from Scars of Mirrodin, which are, again, good but not great, because if they're going to enter the battlefield tapped, you might as well surveil instead. And so you just run like 7+ surveil lands on top of the Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow lands to kind of bridge the gap. And the surveil lands are so powerful in that deck, just doing everything you need. The only problem is that they are bad for a fast standard metagame, which is not a knock against them. That just means that you can't load your deck with them and expect to really beat the aggressive decks, which means Control can't just play tap out Control. They can't just have all their, like, the perfect mana come into play tapped, take their sweet ass time, and eventually take over a game. No, you can very quickly lose on turn 4 in Standard, which just a basic hand from the red deck. The surveil lands, like I said, patch up a lot of the gaps that we're seeing in Standard, and I think in time, because Murders of Karlov Manor is the 12th Standard set, most likely after rotation, we'll see them pick up once the Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt allied lands disappear. We're left with the full set of Pain lands, the fast land reprint, and then the surveil lands. So we might actually see another run on them from Standard if that truly does pick up as a format. Like, these are so much better and doing so much more than I ever could have predicted when we were talking about this ahead of time. Like, hands-on, I thought they were just going to be a boring-ass land that you might fetch up. like the cycling lands.
Yeah.
Like the cycling duels were fantastic. Playing a couple of them in Valakut, in
It was
whatever you want to call
phenomenal.
it, Breach
Yeah.
Titan, Scapeshift Titan, Gruul, Scapeshift, whatever you want to call that deck. One or two of Cycling Land, fantastic in that deck because it put itself in the graveyard, it drew another card, it gave you a little bit of velocity in that regard.
Yeah.
Surveillance can do the exact same thing. There are duels you can fetch it out on one or two if you need to, if you're really hard up for it. The green ramp spell is escaping me. Farseek.
Yeah, Farseek into hand.
Farseek puts it into
is into play tapped.
into play tapped. What Elves into play tapped, but they both get fire, so you can just go get the Rockvale Ridge or whatever it is. If that's the Surveil land, that might be the one from Midnight Hunt. I can't remember, but you go get the Gruul Surveil land. Like, cool. They just do so much more. They patch up so much more of the game. They can turn some like non-draws into actual like functioning draws. It's really impressive how much more useful having the basic land types on these lands are.
Yep.
I'd probably be excited to see the temples back in the same fashion, but for standard at least, because it makes, like I said, the cons wedges work and lets those decks play, because Surveil lands always enter the battlefield taps, temples always enter the battlefield taps. You're not fetching them in standard. Cool, fine, not a problem. The power is when you add fetch lands.
How much better is Adnaz with them though?
Have not tried it yet. I have played against Tez twice with the Surveil lands, and it has always been one of their first fetches.
Yep.
At a Tez, they will fetch first a Surveil land just to put something in the graveyard to power up the thresholds for Cabal, like the Cabal Therapy threshold or Gaia's
Cabal
Will.
Ritual. Or
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Not Therapy. Ritual and Gaia's Will.
Yeah.
Like, out of the arc. Like, they just do so much more in older formats than I ever thought was going to be possible. Like, I still don't think we're done evaluating them as cards, but immediately what we have in front of us is a series of like just fantastic cards overall, and we're just going to continue to find new and better reasons to play them in time. And it's weird that by timeline we spent more time talking about those cards than we did our actual picks, but like, god damn.
But that's how wrong we were.
Yeah, like, and just how impressively good they all are, including the Orzhov one. Still good. All right, if we don't move the pick soon, I'm gonna keep talking about Surveillance. So let's steam forward. I'll go on first because this is a card that people have talked about on Twitter.
Ooh.
So I've been monitoring, how do I want to pronounce this, Galadrim Ambush for about a month and a half now. I've been watching it since the beginning of March. And at the beginning of March, Card Kingdom was buying 104 at $1.25. They were selling 6 at $2.50, and there were 59 listings on TCG Player, LP or better, with a market of 273. When I was taking my notes, Card Kingdom was only buying 43, but they were buying them at $1.50, and the retail, they had 8 at $4. As of recording, Card Kingdom is now buying 57 at $1.80, so we're on the up and up. And on TCG Player, the market is about 281, and there are 96 listings. When I was taking my notes, there were still 96 listings, but there were 27. Sorry, the market was $2.75. So people have just been buying out like some of the copies from vendors at the bottom, which have like 12 and 10 each. So we're pulling quantity. We're not removing listings, is what we're seeing. But we're seeing this card move up, which is fantastic. Now, what does this card do? Well, this is, I like to call this a gotcha fog. So for 3 and a green, you get an instant that says create X11 green elf warrior creature tokens, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-elf creatures. So this card basically gets played in tokens deck, in decks, in elves decks, and any deck that really wants an interesting fog. And if this card sounds familiar, it's because it's almost a carbon copy of Arachnogenesis, a card we'll be talking about in a little bit. Now, broadly speaking in the format, when you set aside the creature types, this has more in common with Arachnogenesis than it does with almost any other fog effect. Galadrim Ambush does cost 1 more mana than Arachnogenesis. The creatures are 1 toughness smaller than what you get with Arachnogenesis. And they also have no keywords, but that 1 single mana increase instead buys you incredibly relevant creature types. Now, Arachnogenesis did see a rather large price spike and like a year ago, and that was for a number of reasons. The first one was scarcity after it saw a little bit of play on streams. This being this a kind of ambush or gotcha fog is really unique. So people wanted to be able to get that kind of counterplay. It creates a large number of tokens at all points of the game, and then over time, Arachnogenesis did get a bit more typal support with Shelob from the Lord of the Rings set, and then a few generic insect-based commanders. Now, when we look at all those points, Galadrim Ambush does check all those same boxes, and also starts with the most popular and easily accessible creature type in Elf. Now, for reference, Elves are the second most popular typal deck according to Rec, only behind Dragons. Period ended. Dragons, Elves. So this has a way to go to reach the same levels of adoption that Arachnogenesis has, but it's almost a certainty that this will happen based on adoption by Elves players alone before you consider tokens players or people that want to play a slower game, like a Feldergriff kind of player who wants to pillow for Trostani, that wants to just pillow for it up and remind you that attacking doesn't always benefit the attacker. Now, I do see this being an important part of Elves and token-based strategies moving forward, though more on the casual side of Casual Commander, similarly to where Arachnogenesis is right now. This card just isn't powerful enough to make huge waves in more competitive versions of Casual Commander because it does require a fair number of creatures attack you. It is a responsive spell. It is fairly obvious what's going to happen once you untap. You're just going to do elf-based things. And it's just like a little too slow to get going. Even if you weren't going to play Nettle Sentinel and some of the other the elf combos where you're going to draw through a chunk of your deck and be more competitive elves, this does still allow you to do some big things with the mana producers. But again, it's pretty slow and goofy. And if you were under a Glimpse of Nature, this is only drawing you 1 card, not a bunch, because of the number of elves that comes into play. From a timeline perspective, this is selling over 20 copies a day, which is great. The Gaming Co. is our current anchor with 376 copies at $2.88. But once we're through the 450 plus copies within the first 50 vendors, this becomes a $4 card with shipping pretty quickly. Although that said, we're probably looking at about 2 to 3 months to get there just based on quantity. So again, there's 450 copies of this card in the first 50 vendors. The Gaming Co. has 376 of them, so it's going to take a minute to get here. But once we get past that 2-month mark, then we just start running through.
Going.
Yeah, like I said, we're up to $4 with shipping. That little bit of obfuscation of you can buy it for $2.75, but there's $1.25 shipping. And a lot of what people saw when they were looking at this and this hit stocks and they were wondering why isn't anybody talking about this card from a finance perspective, is because when you actually zoom in on the graph, it is so when you zoom out, it's pretty flat. When you zoom in, there's just one random crest for no good reason, and then we come back down to this floor. So it just kind of got pushed for no reason. Voha was there to give us some token synergy, or Voja was there for a little bit of token synergy out of Murders, but this isn't a card for that kind of deck. This is more
no.
We spent a lot of time talking about plants. This goes in that, that's the kind of tokens deck we're talking about. We're talking about this isn't just trying to beat face quickly with tokens. This is just, I want to like I said, this is the more casual side of casual Commander. That's who this is appealing to. That's why this wasn't really a good finance call out when it just popped all of a sudden for murders with the hype around Vosha. This is a very long, slow burn of a card. Reprint equity. The name is tied to the Lord of the Rings universe, so this will have to be turned into a universes within card, and there might be a bit of an issue with licensing in the future. So this is honestly really hard for me to kind of predict. My gut says that we will get more Lord of the Ring cards in the futures, but we won't see this in particular come back as either a Universes Beyond or a Universes Within card. They're just not going to reprint something when they re-up the license or release a new Lord of the Ring product. We just won't get this. And then from a buy quantity standpoint, I believe I have 0 copies of this card. And as I'm not... I wouldn't be servicing a single local playing elves, which is ridiculous to think about. When is the second most popular typal deck? I just have a lot of competitive commander players in the area.
Fair.
If I did have the ability to move in quickly, I'd probably just pull up about 8 of these and just sit on for buy list or to flip back into the market. That's what I'm comfortable holding now, just smaller quantities. But as we've learned from the Gaming Co., you can have 376 copies of this at $2.88 and probably be fine.
Yeah. I think this card's great, and I think the reprint equity is the cherry on top because the card itself is just really good.
Yeah.
Does all of the things you want at a casual level. Fits into all the archetypes, just like you said, and the fact that it is nigh unreprintable at this point is pretty good because, again, they keep saying that the cost of Universes Beyond is why their profits are not meeting expectations. So if that's the case, I just don't think they re-up that license.
That's fair. I did mention this has 2 relevant creature types, and I want to make sure I touch on this. They are elves and warriors, and cowards can't block warriors.
Yep.
That is a thing people do believe in Commander, so warriors do have some play as a creature type. Probably less than spiders, but still relevant.
Well, and relevant because you know what most tribal decks run, especially elves, is Coat of Arms. So that's two creature types to share.
Over just spiders, yep. So.
Speaking of things that are long, slow burn cards, I am going back to about 4 weeks ago when we did our reprint equity episode, and I am picking 5th edition Mana Vault. Now, the stocks graph is why it's trending up. So why are you doing this? Why would we buy it now? Well, you can see that we were on just a long, gradual uptrend, and we still are. The other thing is the release calendar for the year. Where would they possibly print Mana Vault in a product at this point? It would have to be in a commander deck of Dusk Moon or something like that. And if that's the case, we're not getting this reprinted this year. This is just going to steadily rise again and again and again until we hit the point where we were at $100 for a Mana Vault. And right now, granted, there are very few listings on TCG of LP or near men. It's barely 2 pages, and they are sitting around $45.50. That said, how many of your locals have this card sitting around from a spare deck that they took apart? How many of them have it in binders that they just never remember to take it out or put it somewhere? This is a card that people have quantity of, and this is something that I think you can literally just count as a short-term certificate of deposit at this point, where in the next 2 to 3 months, you'll continually see gains on it. If we go back to looking at, January 23, we started at a low of $34, and now we're at $46. So we've seen 50% accumulation in a year and a half. That's a pretty good return.
Yep.
I expect that trend to continue. This card isn't getting banned in EDH. This isn't a card that's seeing play in 60 card formats where you have to worry about it. I mean, sure, it's in shops lists because shops. But there's no reason that this shouldn't continue unless all of a sudden we just have Secret Lair, all of the rest of the reprint equity we have, which I guess could happen because Hasbro. But I just don't see this getting reprinted, and it's going to continue its upward trend because it's a card that every EDH player needs. They may not need it in every deck, but every EDH player needs this card. So there is always someone to out it, and there is always someone nearby who has a copy. So it should be fairly easy to pick up. You can just pick it up, park it for a month or 2, see where it's at, sell it out then. And the nice thing about that is we could sell it a multitude of places, because if we continue on the trend we're going, by next year we should have a 25% increase. You can profitably send it to buy list at that point, or you can out it in the open market, or you can out it in trades. However, this is just as close to a blue chip that is going to continue ascending as we can get outside of the reserve list in today's market, basically. So I wanted to point it out before it got too much higher and people woke up, and literally within the first page of near mint listings and light play, it gets to $120 in one page. It goes from 50 to 120. So wanted to call it out before the opportunity completely disappeared from everywhere.
Yep. No, I like Vault as a look, just like we talked about with Crypt in the previous episode. Like, how can you actually just kind of push these cards and push supplemental sets without just dumping these cards into the open market? The Fallout Secret Layers have 3 hidden cards: Codex Shredder, Wastes, and then sometimes Vault 13. Mono Vault will replace. But that's not a printing. You know, the Fallout decks are limited quantity, or the Fallout Secret Layers are going to be limited quantity, so we know it's going to sell out. Like you mentioned, there's no supplemental set this year that has the opportunity to print Mono Vault. The Marvel one might. I don't think Final Fantasy has an object as a property that really lends itself to be Crypt or Vault.
Yeah, exactly. Ribbon's the most notable thing, or the Buster Sword. It's not a Mana Vault.
Yeah. Or you'd be looking for a vessel of some sort, right? And I just don't think there's a good enough vessel to do that. The vaults in Fallout made sense because they are all throughout the series.
Vaults.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there is opportunity maybe in one of those 2 supplemental sets, but we don't really know what's going to go on with that kind of Universes Beyond stuff yet, and whether or not they need to juice it with cards like that. I suspect not. When the Lord of the Rings set didn't need to, it was just ridiculous and over the top without having to pull from existing Magic cards. They just did a great job, repurposing some things and retooling others for brand new cards. It was an overall good look. I think, like we talked about with Crypt, I think Vault is a good look for a spec always, because competitive Commander is still picking up. We just found out that WotC made outreach to support paper CEDH, which means that they are recognizing that the format is being played. That probably means that we're going to keep the ban list the same, but that means cards that are more competitive than they are casual, like Crypt and Vault, can see that surge shortly if the TOs of these events actually do want to start partnering with WotC. With this, will we see, competitive, like true competitive Commander? Probably not, because it's a rules nightmare. And I believe the only people that want to play CEDH for prizes are the kind of people that think they're really good at hidden roll games but can never win there. So they just have to politic at the CEDH table instead. Like, that's it. And
holy shit, that's perfect.
You start reading these posts and you're just like, wow, you're the werewolf, huh?
Yeah.
And I believe, like you, that this is a card that needs to be looked at and needs to be treated properly, needs to be respected. And if it's something that you can move into, then picking up a couple of these and holding them is just going to be the right thing to do, because they always recover. They always move. They are just solid cards.
Yep.
So, we're running out of cards with the word mana to talk about that are artifacts, but I'm sure we can scrounge some others up for the next couple of weeks.
Manolith, baby.
Ugh.
Never.
No. All right, before we fall down a rabbit hole, anything else for this week?
Nope.
All right.
That does it.
So for at MtG Cabalcast, where you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Haltai and Reptar. You are
At Damon_Thurston.
And we'll see you next week.